the culture, everything that you know about China came from Yellow Emperor. And within that, there was the Taoist alchemy was the center point of that, is being able to absorb the riches. We call it absorbing the riches, which is sourcing the whispers of the universe and using yourself as the tuning fork.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. I have such a treat for you today. Taoist Master San Qing is with us. San is a prolific channeler and healer with a reputation for direct access to the spirit realm, and you're going to love this guy. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends. Now let's go talk to San. San, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you. We have struck up a friendship here that is going to be, I think, really fun to watch it unfold. So welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me on your podcast. It's a real honor, and I'm very grateful. You're just a magical expression of true source energy in all different ways and forms. And I was very grateful to have you on mine. And I'm really excited to have a conversation today.
Right back at you, babe. Everything you said, ditto, right back at you. Let's just get right into it. You combine ancient spiritual practices with modern neurology to help people manifest their desires. So please tell us about that.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I spent many decades focusing on more smaller groups and probably, if you look at the up and down the peninsula within Northern California, Silicon Valley, I was entertaining a lot of people that were, they needed the guru, the healer. It was in the thousands, but I got to a certain point where I was conflicted. I needed to really start reaching the masses in the millions. And so through my talking to my teachers, I was able to, being my teachers, I channel my source energy, Lao-Tzu, 3 pure ones. I then decided to abandon that sort of more boutique sort of environment and get into a larger scope. So with their guidance, we created a visual audible experience, evoking a kinesthetic visceral response that comes in the form of this app that I developed so that people can sort of literally fall into this sort of state of knowing and activate sort of like a gamma brainwave in moments. And so you then, through my own measurement over my career, I've measured my brainwaves all the time when I'm in the state of like healing. And it always ends up between 40 and 400 hertz is the sort of the margin of frequency sort of like variable. And so that, using the neurology and understanding how that works from the integration of a spiritual practice, because it's the indigenous practices come right back to the visceral response of, incantations, scripture, words, things that are creating this response from a DNA perspective, where you're evoking, the words, the letters, the numbers, the symbols, and that is you speaking to yourself. And most people feel it from their heart. They get an expansive or contractive response. And so I wanted something a little bit more detailed. And through this experience that I created, visual audible, you're able to really measure your neurological response and almost instantaneously after the first time. So basically, you expose yourself to it. The visual audible experience creates the kinesthetic response, and you literally have what's considered, 10 pina coladas, a full body massage in 10 days in the Bahamas in seconds. And people are like, how does this even work? I don't have a belief system. I don't have it. So when you get into that state, the ability to heal is now. And so this way I'm able to broaden the scope of helping people remember who they are. And so there's sort of an integration of these things relying on the 5 senses as the baseline. And then, of course, as you envelop that sensory perception, it gets bigger and bigger by the second. And, the idea of 5 senses turns into 100, and it's really based on your imagination. Hopefully that answered your question.
I need to unpack that a little. Okay. So first, helping people know who they really are. Who are they really? Who are people really?
Well, it's a remembrance that we reference within Taoism, and it's called returning to the mother of all things, the Tao. And that entry point is between the breath in and the breath out, the yin and the yang. We call it the wu ji, the stillness. And that can be activated from a seeker's journey of coming to the realization of the wu wei, the effortless action that takes place for you to realize that you are this present moment. And by doing that, you're sort of teleporting what you do as, your default realization, bringing perfection back into this sort of state of distortion, which is really the 3D reality that most people are operating in, as they're subject to their life experiences, their emotional state, which creates more distortion in their own sort of like journey. And the first thing you want to do is realize your emotions don't control you, you control your emotions. And when that starts to happen, magical things take place and you do get to reset. So emotions are like from a macro to micro, being that you are the universe is you, all is one, one is all, Hermetic principle, as above, as below. Then you start to realize the emotions are basically distorting the ecosystem of your universe. And you want to bring that universe back to synchronicity.
You mentioned Wu something.
Wu,
did you mean
Wu Ji?
Wu Chi?
And Wu Wei. Wu Wei is
Wei.
a definition of the seeker's journey, and it refers to the fluidity of the universe. So the flow of all things within Taoism, we speak about all rivers return back to the ocean. And that's that center point, which from a geometry perspective or a sacred geometry perspective, the center of all things. And once you hit that center point, we call it the Wu Ji, which is between the breath in and the breath out, which is the effect of the polarizing duality that everyone starts off at. And so that center point is really the center point of all energy, which some people would refer to as the Big Bang. But this is how you start to understand that everything has an energetic profile, and that center point is where you start.
Wow. Why I'm so fascinated is because, as you know, I call myself a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness. And I never heard that term before. So I'm thinking, well, did I channel the woo-woo? I guess I did, because woo is the point where everything originates.
The Wu Ji is where it's the center point of all things. And it's like there are no coincidences, my dear friend. You're picking up what I'm putting down, but you picked it up a long time ago, but you're just remembering that you picked it up, and it happens to be similar to the way I pick things up, kind of thing.
Well, and it's so much fun. And I know you've experienced this too, where I always say, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo, because woo-woo's been around a whole lot longer. And I love the definition of woo from you. That's a big thing for me. And we're only into this 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so
I mean, we're both feeling the visceral effects. That's the energetic charge that we're both experiencing right now, which the audience will experience.
Yeah, and so you're dropping golden nuggets in the first 5 minutes. I love it. What about when you say people can heal? Are you talking about emotionally, physically, health-wise, all of the above? Say more about that.
All of the above. And so, a dear friend of the channel, Jules from her reference point of what she calls healing, she steps above the perception of, senses, the perception of duality, the perception of the universe, and she goes straight to what she calls the direct source, which is so funny. When you listen to her, it's almost like listening to you. It's like really interesting, because you get right in there and you start describing the DNA and how it's morphing and turning and elevating and expanding. And, physical healing was something that I was exposed to, 30 years ago almost instantaneously in my journey. And I'm sort of like, I don't want to sound like spoiled, but it's a standard sort of like response that I see, which really, when you look at the hierarchy of energetic profile, it would be at the lowest. So for something to manifest into a physicality, you've really been holding on to this thing for many lifetimes, or perhaps how far your lifetime and what you've experienced. So yes, I'm talking about physical healing, flesh transmuting back to its original state within, moments, burns, fusing, energy. Like the first thing I saw was gangrenous flesh transmute back to a pink color in 40 minutes. And that was the first thing I saw. And so, bones fusing, tumors shrinking, all that kind of stuff. It's never a dull moment. I'm never not excited to witness it. And it's really a resonance. And, from my observation and your mastery, you're coming in it probably a similar way that I am. We're bringing a resonance that person can remember it and then retune themselves to perfection. Manifest is what we call it within Taoism.
Right. And it's so much fun. I know it is for you too, where I'll see new things. And I think that that just appeals to my inventor brain. And sometimes I feel like a little bit of a ninny and I'll say, oh, this is so cool. I haven't seen this before. And I'm describing some, healing that's happening. And then it seems like once I see it, then I'll see it with other clients or other people who've called into the show. So it's reaching, to your point, a resonance, a frequency on something that is Spirit's allowing it to come in. And then once it's in, I got it. And I'm saying, oh, okay, well, we're going to do this again. And so that's what makes it kind of fun. What's the way?
The way is basically the definition of what Tao means. Tao in of itself means the way, the path, the golden path to your realization of returning to who you really are. And that's in definition what the Tao means. And so the seekers are always looking for the way, their way, the only way. And, that's probably a really good reason why I called my app The Way 126.
Yeah, what's the 126 signify?
The Way 126 down. Now we get into numerology, right? And I'm not poo-hooing numerology, but the numbers when we talk about them within Taoism are really profound, sort of like pinnacle. And a lot of this stuff is coming back right now, especially with a lot of historians, people that are getting into sacred geometry. The numbers always return to 9. Now, we talk about 440 hertz, which has been sort of a bastardized frequency for many centuries, and it's been standardized, but it's actually creating incoherence and a disturbance within your own ecosystem. That's why people are resorting to the 432 hertz, which is the resonance of what we call the heart center, or the balance within the universe. And when we talk about the heart center, we talk about the pink, green, like aura of what someone would call their heart chakra. And what is that relevant to? It's the electromagnetic spectrum of the light source of the sun as it transmutes through the magnetic field of the earth. And you have that light spectrum, and that's why it's relevant to the chakras within the physical body, the energetic components. That's the center of the rainbow. That's the center point again. So we go right back to that center point. And so within the systems of numbers, they're finding all this correlation right down to Da Vinci and other scholars over history that keep resorting back to these numbers. And it's self-evident throughout, the pyramids. I mean, people are getting their minds blown. And the number 9 is the highest number for a Taoist. And we use the mirroring effect of that. So when we hit 81, it now is turned in reverse. So it turns into 18. And so we go back down in 9s from 81 down to 0. And so it's a complete mirroring effect. So within Taoism, we have this really powerful incantation, which is basically a power abundant in its giving, you will receive, unifying the body with the spirit with the energy, bringing heaven to earth, transcending all is one, one is all. Revealing perfection manifest. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. Now, the charge you got from that meant that you were feeling whatever I was putting out there, my friend. And that is part of the mirroring effect. When you look at it closely, unifying the body with the spirit with the energy, is the mirroring effect of the duality that is absorbed into what we call the center point, which reveals all is one, one is all. That is the present moment. And so, yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, we know what we're talking about right now.
Well, the interesting thing about that is when you were just reciting that, my whole body was buzzing.
Because
I wasn't getting goosebumps, which is what I'll get a lot with
chills.
Validation of something from spirit, but I could feel my whole body going bzzz while you were saying that.
That's
Tell
a
us
very
more
powerful
about the Tao. Is the Tao a religion? Is it a philosophy? I know it's ancient. I know it's ancient. So, tell us what the Tao is.
Yeah. So the Tao is sort of like a realization when you go right back to what they call the sparking seed of Taoism, that we regress, back to on paper 6,000 BC, but quite frankly, being in concert and communication with all my teachers, i.e., for example, the origins of the Yellow Emperor, who was the first known evidence of the construct of Chinese landscape. He presided 6,000 BC, and we were using pictographs and oracle bone reading as a ledger to basically transcribe history. And that merges into basically today's contemporary offering, which is simplified Chinese, which is Mandarin. And then you have traditional Chinese, which is Cantonese. But then that goes back 7 emperors, and each emperor would alter the dialect and the actual characters of this language through that morphing. And so Taoism started with the Yellow Emperor coming down from the heavens on a celestial dragon. And then he was basically magnetized to the earth for 18 days and nights, downloading all the information for the infrastructure of Chinese culture as you know it today. And that has the seed of the Taoist alchemy that I teach people, which is an inner working of separating electric from magnetic and merging conscious and unconscious process. But the alchemical response is where you get into the secret source, where we activate what you would call a chakra. We call them dantians, which is energy, the energy field. And so we work with Ni Dan, which is internal alchemy, activating Neigong, which is basically internal power. And that infrastructure is what all seekers for thousands of years, and especially consciously for human history, have been pursuing the internal alchemy, because we're second to none with that. And quite frankly, I've yet to see anything that comes close. Potentially, there's evidence of some elements of that within the Rosicrucian sort of practices, but it still doesn't hold a candle to what we pull out of the internal alchemy stuff. So then that was transcribed into Chinese medicine, the culture, everything that you know about China came from Yellow Emperor. And within that, there was the Taoist alchemy was the center point of that, is being able to absorb the riches. We call it absorbing the riches, which is sourcing the whispers of the universe and using yourself as the tuning fork. So it's the seeker's journey. You could reference it to potentially a parallel to Gnosticism, a Gnostic journey where people know who they are and they're reminded of that. And they have what we call a monologue, not a dialogue, with source information. Now, my teachers, which I channel and have been for 30 years, their dialogues that I have, they're facets of what we call within Taoism perfection manifest, which is the diamond. The diamond is perfect, and we look at each facet as another entry into that perfection. And that's just what, in New Age information, my teachers would be called the Akashic records, the halls of Amenti, Another friend of mine, Jules, calls it the Yugal system. And of course, your own offering, Julie, what do you call your source information? The woo-woo?
Spirit.
Spirit, right.
Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Which
Taoism, I'm sorry.
All of the above.
Yeah. So Taoism is basically an identification of all these different facets. And there's an offspring of that where the Tao Te Ching, which is what people are most familiar with within Taoism, is a transcribing of the Lao-Tzu, one of my teachers that I channel on a second-by-second basis. He had a moment with the universe where he transmuted the information, channeled it directly, and created the 81 incantations within the Tao Te Ching. I just transcribed it for the 2024 version. I just published it. We call it the magical register. So each verse is an incantation, and it has 81 levels to that incantation with a frequency and a color and a shape that goes with it. And it's like a magical mystery, right? People get high as a kite using this stuff. And then you start moving from the magical register into what I teach people, which is Taoist rites, where you use the shapes, the colors, and the frequencies to evoke instant healing.
Interesting. We had a guy on the show not too long ago named Tom Palladino, who's a scalar energy and plasma energy scientist. And he he informed me about things that involve plasma energy that I've seen for a long time in my mind's eye. And he said that that's where all the healing happens. And with you talking about the frequencies, he says it's all happening in the plasma field. And that's the energy from source. It's also the energy that comes from the sun and the moon and the stars and all of that. And when I do stem cell energy, when I use stem cell energy in healing, of course, when I say I, it means spirit working through me and with me to help somebody heal themselves. Nobody heals anybody else. And no medical provider, you don't, I don't, we're helping them heal themselves. And he says the reason why I see the vortices is because that's plasma energy inside the vortex, much like a tornado has plasma energy on the inside. And to your point just a couple minutes ago, plasma energy can separate molecules and join them back together in a different form, meaning you got a broken leg, the plasma energy can work on that and take that apart and re-heal the leg. And it can be in a nanosecond, or it can take time to integrate into the body. When you find that it's taking time for somebody to integrate a healing into their body, do you find that there's an emotional component at play as well? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the foundation of Chinese medicine and I think there's a lot of like variables, Vedic sort of like processes, Sanskrit, Hindu sort of realization of that type of healing system. But in essence, within Chinese medicine, within Taoist alchemy, Taoist realization, there's an emotion and a virtue attached to everything. And so when you regulate the emotion, you reveal the virtue. And so we go through the first 9 energy centers that are in the construct of the physical body, and you regulate those. And through that, there's an ecosystem, the 5 elements, the lungs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, and the spleen. And each one of them reveals an emotion to virtue. And in most cases, people are excess or deficient, depending upon the life of some of their life journey. And that comes to form of thought, feeling, and emotion that is generated. And then you create this cluster, this disturbance, this, what my dear friend Martin there's a Buddhist monk calls the dukkha, the distortion. And so that's the weight that is transmuted within the physical flesh. And so potentially, yes, the reality is I'm not going to, if you want to refer to laws of anything, if we want to craft a hermetic principle, the law of assumption, if you want to put it like that, which the evidence-based is this: everything is the present moment. So if you realize this, no matter what healing is now, And if there's a prolonged processes for that healing, it can be problematic for the seeker or the healee or the healer because of the resistance to this idea that everything is a duality, which comes from, being distracted by your emotional content. And you believe you are this human body. You believe you are the reflection in the mirror that defines you as your personality, this human flesh and blood that you see before you. When in actuality, right from one of my teachers, Jade Emperor, when you accept you are not of this body, what can harm you? Nothing.
Yeah.
And so I would absolutely agree with you that emotional content would be problematic and could potentially prolong someone's instant realization of returning who they are. And in that is a side effect. You get a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual healing from that realization. So yes, the emotional content will prolong potentially someone's instant event, but in most cases, when you access that, as I've seen with you, you're doing it on a weekly, on a daily, it's now, and people experience that like, woof.
Yeah.
They're not, we're hanging around for that.
Right. It's been my experience that there's always an emotional component that's connected to any kind of medical condition before it manifests. And once we illuminate where did that energy block, I call it, begin, we don't need to relive all the drama and trauma. We get to the root, we get to the core. Instead of peeling an onion a layer at a time, let's take the onion out by the root. And then it gets rid of all the rest of it. It's been my experience. Then the body has the potential to heal. And yet it's always that person's spirit's prerogative to allow the healing to be instant or days, weeks, months, or need complementary care like physical therapy or change in diet or surgery or whatever. But it's, again, it's been my experience, it's spirit working through me to help that person heal themselves. And that sounds like that's what you're doing as well.
Yeah, it's so I love listening to the incredible, as I always say, there's a million ways up the mountain. There's no right or wrong way, there just is. And when we all come to our own realization of this present moment, it translates into the same thing. And when you're referencing the scalar waves, it's interesting. I've actually had Tom on my channel. I haven't published it yet, but it's an interesting thing because you're looking at scalar waves. But what I just want to be very clear to the audience, what I know Julie to access and myself goes way beyond that. So, the mother, being the Tao, is not on the same electromagnetic spectrum as what we speak of when we're talking about a wave or a frequency. Because within Taoism, we talk about, the cultivation of the middle dantian, and we have this energetic practice of building that alchemy. It's called the death of a star, the raising of the red phoenix, and the revealing of the black hole energy, which is one cultivational practice that activates the fractal pattern within that middle dantian, which consists of 81 chambers, that has a spiraling effect that is in a clockwise fashion. And so the upper dantian has a counterclockwise spiraling effect with 81 chambers. And then the lower dantian has the circle, the full form, the 81 dimensions of the most profound perfection, which is the circle, which is the center point of all things. So when you merge these two together, you get an alchemical processes which merges the conscious and unconscious process, or in turn you can separate yang from yin and move the electric from magnetic. And then, I don't call it party tricks, but when I'm doing electric charges on people, I get them to stand on a wet rag on the floor, because I'm gonna it's as if you put your finger in an electric socket where you get a bump. And I mean, I don't get that detailed. It's a supercharge. It's like you got electrocuted. Now, I've gone through and trained under masters and yogis across the earth, and two of them actually have have so much juice, they put a leaf, they carry a leaf in their hand and they touch you with that leaf and you're standing on a wet rag, or that will literally fry you. And so there's a degree of energetic potential. I've never really got that excited about. I mean, I get into that cultivational practice, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is watching physical healings. But, it will reset and charge your whole physical body instantaneously.
It's interesting that you talk about the vortex, which I see with stem cell energy. There's always a vortex there.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see I believe is what you were referring to when you mentioned a spiral of energy or just a circle of energy. And it looks to me like the Milky Way galaxy, and it's spinning like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different from the vortex energy that I see. And it happens in other healings, like stem cell energy. I always see a vortex. That other energy, I see a lot as well, but it's very different. So do you think that's what I'm seeing in my mind's eye?
Absolutely. I mean, it resorts back to the framework of the universe, and that's why people reference sacred geometry, because it always comes in that same form. Mm-hmm. And so the stillness for a Taoist is the center of the tornado, which is the oneness, right? But everything has that fractal pattern, and that circular fashion is the infrastructure of the universe. And you can take it right down to a subatomic particle, up to the cowlick on top of your head, to the sun. We all present this same characteristic, the same fractal pattern. It's in variables. So if you look at it under a microscope, or you look at it as a macro, it will present itself in every way, shape, or form. That's the creation of the universe.
The interesting thing too, San, is that when somebody is dying, as they're, I've got my 12 phases of transition that I describe with angels and deceased loved ones and pets, spirits around the person who's dying. There's always a vortex that forms at the end phases. It starts at about phase 9. And that's been my experience when I watch. That's how the spirit separates from the body, but it goes through that vortex, and it's in the middle of the vortex that you just referred to, where everything is still and it's one. And that's part of is that an alchemic? It's alchemy kind of thing. What's going on?
Well, it's an alchemical process. So I've had the great fortune of witnessing transitions myself also. And it's really, you watch what some people would call the chakras, we call them dantians, they shut down, and the spirit starts to separate from the physical flesh, and it moves through that, what you would perceive as a portal, entering a higher dimension. And in some cases, depending upon what it is that person's journey or how they're operating within their incarnation, you're going to get a different viewpoint that could be problematic, because you could potentially be earthbound depending upon your circumstances. Now, the essence of Taoism is that everything is like a bellows. It contracts and expands and contracts and expands. And we remind the seeker that man is not like that. And so when you embody the idea that you are this human flesh, you limit yourself and separate yourself from the now, the truth. And that makes you, of course, not accessing the immortality that is the true essence of who you are. And so that comes down to, lengthening your telomeres, increasing your longevity, which is really the seeker, any Taoist seeker, that's the main objective, is to increase the length of their lifetime, to level up their consciousness, or as my dear friend James Tooney would say, spiritual consciousness, because I feel like it's kind of problematic. And he makes a good point that there's this ongoing sort of like undercurrent of really separating someone, but it's a distraction. By calling it consciousness or conscious agency, we're missing the point where we're identifying as the human. And that's the big mistake when you want to really level up. It's sort of like, The Secret. The biggest downfall of The Secret was they asked the individual, what are your values? And of course, if you're not the present moment, which is no place, no person, no thing, how can you acquire this resonance? Because you're looking at your values, you're separating yourself, you're now identifying. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah. Okay, let's change gears for a second here. let's go to something that's, not like way above my pay grade here. Were you raised in a specific religion, or do you come from a spiritual family? Obviously, you come from abroad, outside of America.
Yeah.
I know where you're from, but tell everybody else. Tell us a little bit about your family and how did you get into all this, this Tao stuff?
The woo-woo.
The woo-woo. I love that you taught me that today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think if I had to recall my coming from a single parent household, being raised by a radical feminist, offspring of sort of like a delusional state back in the 70s, things change. And so I had more an insight into the feminine nature, the divine feminine, the intuition, this yin energy, just due to my environment, because I spend most of my time around women. And I think that sort of created this connection and remembrance of who I was in past lives. But that sort of turned into, I wasn't really motivated by any specific spiritual state. I just had a very high intellect, a very high gamma. So I was a top 1 percentile academically inclined super brain, you would call it. And so I spent most of my time
today.
I don't know
still
about
shows
that.
today.
I don't know about that, but I spent most of my childhood warding off troglodytes, Neanderthals, people that potentially couldn't understand the purpose of their presence, and they couldn't understand how this kid was just like so smart and didn't do anything other than look over their shoulder, because I was constantly being verbally, physically harassed as a child. And that's where I would viscerate people verbally, because they attempted to take out their mummy and daddy issues after their mother drank a bottle of bourbon the night before, beat the life out of them. And so they came to school and went, how do I let this out? Oh, this guy, I need to beat the crap out of him because I'm going to feel a hell of a lot better when I do. He's too weird. But the will aspect of my essence was I never backed down, and they couldn't understand that. So in certain points of my childhood, I had anywhere from 8 to 10 kids stomping on me, doing horrible things that would be defined as a bullying sort of scenario that would not be accepted in today's society. And so I think I grew from the licks. It took me at the age of 10 to resort to something a little bit more physicality-wise. So I picked up this thing called The Education of a Bodybuilder by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I was like, you know what? I can viscerate someone with my words, and that is really the most powerful, as you felt the resonance. But then again, I needed to feel grounded, embodied by this superpower that I realized I had. So I started bodybuilding and powerlifting, and by the age of 16, 17, I was 187 pounds and competed 4% body fat. I was doing these types of things, lifting stupid weights. And even back in those days, intuitively, I was eating one meal a day and I was getting stronger. Now, people start to understand from a nervous system, neurology, nutrition aspect, the power of what we call within Taoism resting, which some people would call fasting. And so I was very familiar with the nutrition as a young boy, and I've used it over the years as a massive element. And within Taoism, the optimal resonance is one meal every second day, and you'll feel like you've got 20 cups of coffee, superhuman. And so that led me into spending most of my teenage years developing this skill, even though I had no religious beliefs. And then I had this moment where I was getting into silly weights, 500 and 700 pound squats and deadlifts. And there was a voice in my head saying, you must find more. And I'm like, okay, what does that even mean? I've been listening to the other voices. I guess, why not? The meditation. Now, back in those days, meditation was Hare Krishnas and weirdos, from that era where, we're just coming out of like, accepting, the Beatles and the Yellow Submarine and all that LSD stuff into, the 70s and 80s where, this is, excess. It's time to get into the rat race and, Hollywood and Americana and all that kind of stuff. But there was much of that just left me empty. And I was still pursuing this physical thing. And then I got that voice. And I was like, okay, meditation seems weird. I pick things up, I crush them, I throw them around. That's what I'm good at. I don't think I know what it's like to be still. This is what I was given the definition of. Be quiet in your mind, just still everything down. Now, little to my knowledge, I was doing that my whole life. The ability to be myopic and focusing and literally laser focused to create anything I want, and at a superhuman light speed pace. So this voice told me, go and find meditation. I'm like, I don't know. So I found this sort of like freebie at a rec center, and you get to a ghetto area. This woman's like the little 50-pound wet nothing, grandmaster. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there as a gorilla, overgrown gorilla, sitting there attempting to twist myself into lotus position. My back was aching. I've got noise outside because we're in this youth center in that ghetto. I literally lost my life getting to the front door, and I'm hearing ambulances, dogs, all this kind of weird stuff. I'm thinking, this is not going to work for me. I'm sitting there looking around the room. There's half a dozen misfits, just beggars, we're all beggars. We're like, here, a freebie. Oh, you're going to teach me how to meditate. So I'm looking around the room going, I'm just one of those oddballs like the rest of them. I mean, okay. And so this woman's like, now, I want you to listen to my voice. I'm like, okay, I've got dogs barking, screaming, a whole thing, just craziness. And I'm thinking, this is not going to work. And I'm not as weird as the rest of these weirdos in here, but it's a freebie, right? So I'm like, now listen to my voice. And when you listen to my voice and I stop talking, everything will fall away. And I'm like, and just like that mesmerizing effect you and I are having, the charge you're getting, then the second she said that, it went silent. And then I would look at her and she's like, I was just like, I don't know what this is, but this is the most powerful thing I have ever accessed in my life. Forget about the weights, forget about crushing things, I stopped. I don't know what it is. Time, sound, everything was instantaneous right now. And I'm like, I'm onto something. Now, of course, that was a profound effect. It was like probably someone's equivalent to an LSD, the psychonaut experience, because it was so visceral and it was so now that I'm like, man, if you could switch things on and off like this is insane. That's the following week, I took a channeling class and I channeled Lao-Tzu for the first time. And so I instantly accessed Lao-Tzu. Now, that teacher at the time had 60 years experience in channeling. And he was just like, what the? He says,
yeah, really. I mean, let's just go to one of the most important teachers ever.
Right. And he's like, why you? Why you? This overgrown ape that comes to me like looking for crumbs, thinking he's going to find something. And I've been doing this 60 years. And all of a sudden you walk in here and poof. And I mean, everyone in the class which is a visceral thing, but when I channel him directly, and I'm always in concert with him and talking to him on a second by second basis, and most of the things that come out of my mouth, if they're if any way intelligent, they're not mine. So they're definitely coming from him. But moreover, it's like the people in the class were like using sticks and marshmallows, cooking their marshmallows, because I was transmitting so much heat and energy from his presence. Right. And that happens now every time I channel him. Whenever I do individual channeling or whatever, it's been the same way for 30 years. So I go from that, and then I have this event where I'm starting my training, and the first thing I experience is, I'm doing sort of literally a specific ritual in distance healing. And this is kind of like a sort of a thing where it's like, do this, this, and this. You've got this like chart. You click off the chart. Now, I attribute it to look at everything at face value. I just accept it, right? The present moment. Now we understand it's like, oh, the present moment. And so I finished this program. Anyway, in those days, there's rotary phones. My friend calls me up and says, look, I can't meet you today. I've got a sprained ankle. And I'm like, that's disappointing. Anyway, I'll catch up with you next week. And I'm like, whoa, hang on. She's like, what? I'm like, let me try this thing. I was learning it today in class. It's called distance healing. And she's like, really? What is that? Let me just try it. What's the worst thing that happens? Nothing. So I said, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through this checkoff list in my mind. And in the end, you're going to hear me repeat what they call an incantation. And let's just see what happens. Because I'm just like, well, look, this is going to happen. Anyway, so I go through the list and then I finish off with the incantation. And she's going, will you hurry up? Because whatever you're doing, it's not working. So why don't we just meet next week? And she's like, okay. And I'm like, hang on. And now I'm going to do the incantation. Heal, 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 heal. And then next minute I hear what the fuck? Like she screamed it through the phone. I'm like, what? My ankle just shrunk down before my very eyes and I'm standing on it now. No pain. I'm like, you're full of the old you're full of it. And she's like, I'm not kidding you. I'm serious. I'm like, yeah, sure. I drive over to her house and she runs to me, and she was staying at her mother's house, right? So she runs to me, gives me a hug, and I'm like, what's going on here? And her mother is literally something out of like some Hollywood movie. She's a real affluent sort of person, doesn't believe in doctors. Her idea of a good time is a bottle of vodka and a pack of cigarettes. She was in her 70s, living her life the way it is. I'm just happy. I got money. Don't disturb me. I'm going to do whatever I want. And she's sitting there puffing away, right? Back in those days where inhaling secondhand smoke was fun. You know what I mean? And so she's puffing away and her daughter's giving me a hug. And I'm like, what's going on here? She shows me a before and after what is it? Polarized?
Polaroid.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is unreal. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm a skeptic. I'm like, no. Look, 1 week ago, I'm lifting weights. Next minute, I'm some like enlightened guru, stopping sound and time. I don't know. This is a lot. And the mother's like, I always knew you were a healer. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I knew you were a healer. And I'm like, now this family goes deep into all this sort of like weird sort of like belief system crap. And I'm like, all right, I think I need to time out. I've got to go. And she's like, you can go, but I want you to come back in a couple of days because I got something wrong with my foot. And I'm like, okay. Have you heard of a doctor? No, I'm going to take a look at it. I'm like, but what am I going to do? Listen. All right. I had the girlfriend. I'll appease the mother. Sure, whatever. Sure, whatever. I turn up there, and like she's got a distended stomach. She sits in this like royal throne. Basically, everyone panter around her, tell her what she wants to hear, and she's puffing away, drinking her vodka, and she's a mess. I mean, a mess. And so she's got her foot up on the stool with a sock on, and she's like, "My foot's been hurting for a while. Can you take a look at it?" And I'm like, okay. So I get down there. She can't see anything past her stomach. She's sitting there puffing away. And I pull the sock off. I go, in my mind, I'm like, holy crap. This is like a gangrenous foot. Like it should be amputated at this point. Like, I'm no doctor at this point. I just know I've seen horror movies and this stuff is freaking me out. I'm freaking out. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, how's it going down there? I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, really? We need to get this woman in the car right now, take her to the hospital ASAP. And Latsu's chiming in. At this point, I'd already connected with him. No, we're not. I'm like, what? What do you think we're doing? You're going to witness a healing. And I'm like, What do you mean I'm going to witness a healing? What are you talking about? I mean, my mind is blown at this point with all this weird stuff going on. I don't even know what end is up. And he's like, you're going to witness a healing. Really? Okay. And I'm having this dialogue with him, and I'm like, she's like, so what's going on down there? I'm like,
I'm talking to this dead guy.
pretty much. And then next minute, literally, Julie, in 40 minutes, that gangrenous flesh goes back to pink in color. And I'm just like, I was sold. At that point, my hobby was, I had this thing where I would heat up like sebaceous cysts, raise them to the skin, have them pop open, and then seal back up. And that was like my hobby at that point. I was like, this is crazy stuff, man. And it's fun. It's like a lot of fun. And you get into the energetic signature of it. I think that following, I think it was in a month or so, I had this woman who had a cantaloupe-sized, an infection that looked like a football in her chest from breastfeeding. And when I got to her and I witnessed this thing bubbling up, expanding, her flesh opening up, a liter of pus pouring out, and then it sealed up before our very eyes. And we're just like, I was hooked. I had the spiritual crack pipe. That was my journey. That was it. And so embodied within that was the Taoism, and that came from the Lao Tzu. And so, over this last 30 years, I've been teaching people the inner workings of internal alchemy and energetics. And so this has been my very mild entry into what we would perceive as reality, I guess. I don't know. You and I are used to it. But,
mild? I don't think there's anything mild about it. Yeah, I think it's. I love the stories.
Oh my goodness, you can't make this stuff up.
yeah, I know, and I say that all the time too. How am I gonna make this stuff up? And it's with people that you knew your girlfriend's mom somewhat, but it's normally with people that we don't know, and we don't know what their circumstances are, and we don't know what they've been through in this lifetime, let alone their past lives. And what's going on now, we're just being presented a set of facts as they're describing them, and then we're watching it all take place energetically. It's fascinating. And it's so much fun too. And I know that you think it's fun as well. And I think that's surprising to people because they think everything's so serious. And spirit's pure love. We're supposed to have fun when we're doing this stuff. That's why I say woo-woo. It makes people laugh. And now I know why I'm saying woo-woo to you. All right. Let me see what else I got for you. I got so many questions. Okay, here's one. You're an ordained priest and 66th generation lineage holder and 126th generation lineage holder of Taoism. What the heck's that mean?
Well, it means that I've gone through an ordained processes, and I've trained in the structured monastic sort of path. And then through that, you go through a processes as a sort of a seeker. Then you become a disciple. Then you become an ordained priest. And so that happens over a period of time, several years. It depends. I normally, if I ever ordain anyone as I am a priest, it's normally a long process, and most people fall out within the first 12 to 24 months because what it takes to find yourself is not necessarily what they're looking for. They're looking for the instant hit. And, you want to make sure, and there's one thing that I really appreciate about you is you're clear on who you are. And I think a lot of people, when they get into the healing game, and I'm going to call it a game because that makes it fun, is that they lose sight of the fact that they're looking to distract themselves from the fact that they have a myriad of issues of their own that have still not been realized. And if you can't heal yourself first, it becomes problematic if you're taking on the issue of finding that resonance, bringing it in for someone else, and they become very separate. And when they become separate, that individual takes on all the traits of all their garbage, and vice versa, which is the trap of healers in 2024. And I've noticed that over the last 30 years is they make it about themselves. I'm the next coming of Jesus. I'm the Messiah. I'm the healer. And that makes it problematic. So they take on all the physical traits. So you get the massage therapists, the light workers, and they're all like, I'm exhausted. I'm channeling. I'm exhausted. No, I've got more energy. The more I immerse myself in this, just like yourself, because we're not tapping into our life force energy. We're tapping into the source.
Right.
And it's not ours. And so within those lineages, there's a processes, and you develop a skill, and then you become ordained. And from that, I take the rituals and the training, and I embody that and teach people the internal alchemy practices. And they're even more enriched by direct source with my teachers. And I can safely say there isn't another person on the face of the earth in the Western world that could teach internal Taoist alchemy practices better than myself. And it's the real stuff, not the fragmented rubbish that seems to be, floating around the internet. And it's been very, very sort of like, it is. It's like you've never found a direct source where you can actually cultivate. Some people call it the Fajin, where it's a substance that you acquire when you activate the energetic body, the infrastructure, and you're practicing in Neigong, the internal power, using the Nidan, the internal alchemy, where you have cultivated a substance, and you're not having question about it. You're very, you know exactly where it goes, how it happens, what you do with it, and you can literally move it around like icons on a computer screen, as it should be. You need to be very clear. And I mean, knowing who you are, knowing where you're going is one of the most profound things that, as a healer or someone seeking to be that center point that reminds people who they really are, is really the most important essence that you could embody, is that. And most people are not there. And you know this. And most people will consider a resonance that Julie and I bring into a space as overly confident and kind of arrogant. You're a little too knowing. No, it's just the now. And what happens is that evokes a response within the seeker, who's basically subjected to duality, and it raises their stuff up. We just recently talked about their emotions. And then they point at us going, I'm deficient because of you. And that's not the case. It's got to do with the resonance is so high, you either embody it or you break from it, which is part of what the energy does. It makes you remember. And when you remember, all of a sudden these things will present themselves, which is the delusion of the emotional content. Does that make sense?
It does. And I have talked to several healers and been interviewed on lots of shows like you, and they say, well, a lot of healers say they're exhausted at the end of the day. I said, well, I'm jazzed. I need to, discharge so that I can go back to my regular life and fix dinner and do laundry and, like take out the trash and stuff like that. But it is energizing, and it's so fun and so much joy. And in my classes, I tell my students, and I'll be eager to hear if you do the same thing. I say, this is 10% technique. This is 90% transfer of energy from me to you. We do it over a period of time. And yes, I lecture and we have slides and we have discussions and stuff, because what else are we going to do for 2 days while we're together, while you're getting used to swimming in the high vibe? And people find that hard to understand just because of how we're all educated. You memorize something, you spew it back on a test, and we worry about whether we get it right or not. It's been my experience, and this is what I teach, and I'd love to hear your take on this. As soon as you go into fear, you're knocked out of alignment with spirit, because fear is a low vibration, and spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, what people need to understand, if you're emotional, you're suggestible. That means if you're emotional, you're unconscious. So to be conscious, to be one with all things, is if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. That feeling is evidence-based, self-evident, and it starts and ends there. And so all the semantics of the learning, which within my teachings, within one of my teachers, Jada Emperor, he reminds you, if you have to learn it, you do not know it. If you know it, you don't have to learn it. And so whenever you're in the presence of myself or Julie, we're helping you remember. And so the humanistic aspect is they enter into this new realization with this human condition. And the human condition is what you start, you must finish. So this is what we call a heteroaction from a psychologist's perspective. So when you start something, you need to be able to rationalize it within the intellect instead of accept it within the intuitive. And when you do, that center point being right here, which is the versica, which is also the center point, the Wu Ji, the difference between conscious and unconscious, intelligence and intellect, or intuitive, is this center point. And so you cross over into the stillness. And so that merges together as one. And what you do with, you bring that juice, you bring the woo-woo, for all my OGs, any of my students that watch this interview, they just feel the palpability of your presence because it's the real deal. It's a resonance that cannot be manipulated, or it cannot be faked. And a lot of people fake stuff. The old expression, fake it till you make it. It's like, oh, please. The Hollywood cliche throwaways, which there tends to be this sort of like you need to start somewhere. Your intuition is telling you, come find Julie, come find San Qing. That's great. And then from there, you are going to remember the resonance that we bring in, because let's look at this reality. Light wave, particle to matter. That's the sum of all things. It's just a light spectrum. What we're doing is, from that light spectrum, your attention intention creates energy, a cluster, a thought, feeling, and emotion. That energy has a vibration. The vibration has a frequency. The frequency, if you obtain that frequency and you can hold the line, there's the resonance. And that's all it is. Once you hold that resonance, which is a natural state that Julie is in, it's like, boom, I'm there. And that's a mastery. I imagine from your own admission, if you were to look back at your progression, there was a period of time that you cultivated up to the boom, I'm here. Might have taken you a few minutes, a few days, a few weeks, but there was a progression of development. But that pulpability is second to none. And that's where I find that substance that we speak of. Within Taoism, it's the Qi. Within Hinduism, it's the prana. Within other belief systems, it's God, universe, Buddha, whatever it is, you will know that it is present, and it will alter this moment right now. And that's that part where we're no place, person, or thing. We're just the now, and we're absent of titles. So we go from what I like to call first person, third person, no person. And when you're no person, you are realized, and it will be self-evident by your being able to transmute something. You're bringing the juice, as Julie would say, bringing it to a 3D reality, which is coming from what you call the high five, the 5D. It's not from this electromagnetic spectrum. It's a different light.
Two more questions as we're winding down. As you know, you and I can chat for hours and it feels like it's 5 minutes. Whenever we get together, I just say, okay, wait, we got to do the show because our time window here is going to expire. Is there a difference between prayer and meditation, or is it the same thing?
It's the reverence that you bring. It's the embodiment of what that means. And if we look at it from the simplicity of, a lens of the scientific model, which you referenced, so I'll use it for your audience. You have this infused letters, symbols, numbers embedded into your very subatomic particle expression of a DNA strand that you would identify. That is within you. That's the visceral effect. That's why people gravitate to scripture. They gravitate to words. Now that goes ancient. That's deep rooted into the ancient understanding and the infusement of the seekers finding it through that. And so prayer to meditation is you're leveling up, in my opinion. Meditation is a starting point to realize that you have choices outside of the very moment you have right now. And prayer is like your secret source leveling up, taking that ability to be aware, to find that focus point, and then transmuting it into a visceral experience that will be self-evident.
I had Father Sean O'Lara, who's a PhD, wonderful fellow, Irish priest, retired Catholic priest. And I asked him that question, and he said, this was his take. So I'd love to hear your opinion about this. He said he looked at prayer as more of you talking to God, you talking to source, you talking to spirit, and then receiving information. Whereas meditation is more of a download. He sees prayer as more of a two-way communication, and meditation is more of a, okay, I'm getting this information. I call those divine downloads, where information just comes into our heads. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the ultimate goal from a Taoist seeker is from going from a dialogue to a monologue. That's when you know all things are realized. So I would say that's it depends on the reverence. It depends on the validation and the meaning of the individual seeker, what that script, what that prayer means. But there's a jump off point. There's a starting seed, which is the method, which is what meditation is. It brings your attention to something beyond what is your idea of your reality. And then prayer, once cultivated, becomes this palpable experience that can open a gateway to a dialogue. And ultimately, once you realize that dialogue, there's a gateway to the monologue. And that's when things, the secret source, that's when things happen, which is now.
Right. Last question. Why do we incarnate?
You see, that's a very interesting thing. I mean, 2024 came around, and everyone's asking Lao-Tzu, what's going on? What's going on? And he's a little cheeky, Lao-Tzu, but his answer was quite simple. Imagine you're like a grain of sand, asking the beach, what are we doing today? Fall back into the beach and be realized. And to a lot of people, they're like, holy moly. To me, I'm like, man, I sound like I know what I'm talking about. Wow. Because that oneness is the be all and end all. And what most people tend to sort of like get caught up in is, how do I put it? They separate and they don't realize that the now is all beginning, end, everything. But you need a method to cultivate that.
Right. Interesting. I just am one of your biggest fans, and I'm so delighted that you're in my life, and just wanted to let people see your fabulousness. How's that for a word I made up?
Well, thank you, my dear friend.
So how can people learn more about you and your work?
Okay, you can check me out at the Way 126 Experience, which is basically where you can pick up my digital books, i.e. the transcription of the Tao Te Ching, which is the magical register, always the start-off point. You can get me on social media and the Way 126, or within the podcast world, Consciousness of the Way. And that's on all 20 platforms. Within YouTube, it's the Way 126 Experience. And, I developed the app that I think I spoke on, maybe I did or didn't. But in any case, that app will get you pretty much going. And I like to use that as you could do, if you do nothing but just spend the first 9 weeks enveloping and synchronizing your 9 energy centers, because that's what it does. It synchronizes your energy centers. And, the general side effect from that is you get John Smith, the janitor, going, I healed myself, I healed my dog. I get, attorneys and accountants going, how I had hemorrhoids. It's gone. All I did was sit there and listen to this thing, and it just like completely centered me, because it's all energy, frequency, vibration. And so bringing that into a digital offering makes it really palpable. And for a seeker, I always tell people, you spend 2 months on that app and you develop a skill, because it's creating information energy highways, creating new synapses in your brain, developing and tuning your neural network, that you can repeat this instantaneously after the first go, and it's yours forever. So it's 2 months on the app, develops your mastery of your emotions. So you don't control, you control your emotions don't control you. Within 9 weeks, you will be the master of that. And if you walk away from that and never use it again, you have a skill for life that will never leave you. And I give people exercises on how to measure their development from a day-by-day basis, so that you're not going, hey, I'm spending 27 minutes a day. What am I getting? People tell me, wait a couple of months, you'll start floating and speaking to angels and pixies. And no, within the first time you ever expose yourself to this app, you will be able to test it. Now, I always tell people as a joke, hey, go out and create conflict after you finish the first session. Go and, get all up in someone's grill. And I'm like, I'm just kidding. But you will, most people, what they do is they get into an experience and they get an incredible synchronization, which is a reset, the return to who they are. And what happens in most cases within the digital world, they go and they do the thing and they're like, oh, I'm so relaxed. And they come out of their room after they've finished their app, whatever it is. And then one of their kids runs to them and says, oh, I've got a poopy diaper and, the bills need to get paid. And my wife's telling me I'm late for dinner, and their life just crumbles. This is self-evident. You will be able to move that emotional state like an icon on a computer screen and toss it in the corner of the room, tell it to sit down, turn over, roll over, and play dead. That's the mastery.
Yeah.
And that's the observator.
Wonderful.
So.
Well, everybody, that's it for this session. Sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from Nevada, too, where San is. San, thanks for joining us. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, my dear
We'll
friend.
continue it another time.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.